Good afternoon, everyone. As Monica says, I'm John Needham from RBS, Head of Regulatory Design, which is a bit of a confusing title. Essentially, one of the key parts of my role is resolution planning, which I lead for RBS. And I'm also involved in a lot of the structural change that's necessary in the UK as well, in terms of ring fencing the bank as well, which I'll touch upon as I go through this afternoon. I've been involved in the resolution world for the last 5 years, so it's been quite a journey, and hopefully this afternoon I'll be able to share some insights that you'll find useful. But really what I would encourage is that if you have questions, then please ask those. I'm happy to take them afterwards, but it'd be good to get a few good questions towards the end. And if you disagree with anything I say, then I'm more than happy to take that challenge as well, because certainly I don't have all the answers for sure. So what's the ask here in terms of operational continuity? This is a quote from the FCA's handbook. And the key words here are really the responsibilities of the banks to make sure that we prepare for resolution in an orderly manner and with minimum disruption of critical services. Those are the key words in there. The regulators, as you'll know, own the plan in resolution terms, and they're responsible for producing that plan. However, the operational aspects of resolution definitely sit with us in the banks. The regulators can't do it without us, and clearly we have to follow their lead in terms of the overall strategy and plan. And one of the big challenges of resolution is that you don't really know what you're planning for. The situation is probably likely to be something that you haven't thought of at this point in time. So that makes resolution quite a challenging topic, albeit I fully accept that regardless of the situation or scenario, there are certain things you have to prepare for, and operational continuity is definitely one of those. So on that theme of you never quite know what you're planning for, I've got a little quote here from Scotland's national poet, Robert Burns, and don't worry, I'll translate. But Burns himself was a bit of a character. He was a drunk, he was a womanizer, and he was also a tax collector, to name but three things. And really, essentially, this poem, which is actually it's an excerpt from a poem, which is about actually a farmer and a mouse, you'll be surprised to learn, really means shit happens. And I'm slightly worried that this is being beamed out as part of the conference broadcast. But anyway, that's really essentially what this means. And I think you have to bear that in mind when you're in resolution planning, and particularly in relation to operational continuity. So a bit of context on this slide. There are really three states I would suggest. You've got business as usual, you've got recovery, and then if recovery fails, then you find yourself in resolution. And in resolution, or certainly in recovery and resolution planning, we have to plan for all three of those. And it's really important to do that. And there are benefits in doing that. Some of them are around, obviously, you need to maintain critical services. That's one of our primary responsibilities. However, there's likely to be a strong correlation between what you need to do in resolution with what you would do in business as usual in terms of business continuity or business resilience planning as well. So there are things you can reuse, and that will be one of the things I'll come back to in my presentation. And also, as part of your work on resolution, then it's very helpful in using that analysis and data to test out the operational viability of your recovery options. And I know that that's an area, certainly in the UK, that the PRA and Bank of England are focusing on at present. So why is this challenging? Well, one of the reasons is that banks are complex. There's lots of interdependencies. And some of those interdependencies are things that we really need as banks because they drive the efficiency of our organisations. However, they do create problems potentially in resolution If we don't really understand those interdependencies, have them properly documented, and understand how we would actually unpick them if the need arose. There's also many different types of banks. There are big ones, there are small ones, there are simple ones, there are complex ones. So resolution and operational continuity really needs to be able to cope with that, and that's where the firm-specific analysis and the firm-specific interpretation really comes into play. I noticed you taking pictures of the slides, and that's absolutely fine, but these slides will go on the app if that's of any help. And on that point, the different size of banks is really important. So you can have very complex banks, very large banks, very small banks, and very simple banks. But that really does drive different things in operational continuity terms. So the size will dictate what the resolution strategy actually is and what the service delivery model is. So in RBS, we have gone for a bit of a mixed model in terms of service delivery going forward. We're not going to be creating a ServCo. We already have a couple of them, and we won't be getting rid of those, but we essentially will have most of our operational provision and support within one of the main operating companies. And I'm happy to take questions on that one because I know that stimulates a bit of debate and discussion amongst others. So depending on whether it's a complex group or a very simple bank, the resolution strategy is likely to vary. The operational continuity objectives are going to vary. So certainly for a single point of entry firm like ourselves, it's all about continuity of critical services and then creating essentially the breathing space for the regulator to be able to restructure and resize the bank and reduce the risk, obviously. Whereas in a much simpler organisation, then it will be using asset transfer or an orderly wind-down process, which is obviously quite a different set of circumstances. And the service delivery model, as I've mentioned, will be different depending on the complexity and the chosen strategy of different organisations as well. So what do banks really need to do in terms of operational continuity? So I've got a slide here. I'm not going to go through every single element on this slide because I've got 4 that focus on the main areas to follow. However, I'll pick out some of those. Service cataloguing I would start with because it is a very important task, a very challenging task. When we set out on it in RBS, what we discovered, we really didn't have one single approach to this. We had multiple approaches to it and many different vested interests. So actually really understanding your business and defining it in terms of services and then getting that documented consistently and fully is no mean feat. And if you haven't started, I would certainly advocate you get started on that very soon. Related to that, the creation of objective arm's length contracts within the firm is really important as well. And again, these need to be legally binding, certainly in the UK sense. We need to be able to rely upon these in a resolution scenario to keep the critical services functioning. And for our ring fencing rules, we also need to have that across the ring fence as well. One which we haven't heard a lot from the regulators on as yet is around key workers and who the key resources and individuals are in an organisation, both in terms of roles and people specifically. And I'll elaborate a little on that in a moment. And then operational continuity funding is another key area as well, whereby you need to have the cash to keep the lights on in your organisation as well. So I've got a slide on each of those and I'll just run through those now. So in terms of service cataloguing, it's really important to pitch this at the right level. It would be easy to disappear into a very dark hole if you try to do this at too granular a level. And certainly our experience on this is that you have to really try and maintain a line to keep your cataloguing of services at a level that is sensible, and you're going to be able to marry up all of the other aspects in terms of costing, in terms of how people will understand those services and recognise them in your organisation. And we've done quite a lot of work in that. But as I said earlier, we found we had no single catalogue in the organisation. Finance had one, business continuity had another, technology had yet another, to name but three. And none of them were really compatible with what we were trying to achieve. The closest we did find, though, was business continuity, so perhaps one area to consider. Then describing those services in a way which is in almost legalese to allow you to then have that as part of your contracts is very important as well. And they must meet this arm's length test such that your regulator will be able to look at them and say, yeah, this is a pseudo-commercial arrangement and we can see how this operates and it's transparent enough to be able to be relied upon. Another factor is also that if you do go into resolution, there's a possibility you're going to need that legally binding arrangement to transition into a transitional service arrangement as well. So worth bearing that in mind. Then you have to set up these contracts and, as I say, they need to be legally binding, but they also need to contain robust resolution terms, and I know through Article 55 of the BRRD we'll all be working on third-party contracts, but this is the internal equivalent, essentially, of that. But by far, probably the most difficult area we have found in this whole topic is being able to cost the services at the right level. Because again, we didn't have a costing system in RBS that allowed us to be able to marry that up to service definitions. We had partial coverage using transfer pricing for tax reasons, and we had other cost allocation systems which, frankly, no one really believed or supported within the organisation, but were really used to spray the central costs out to the franchises in the organisation. Neither of those provided a full solution, so we've had to do a lot of work to find a solution. But all of this goes to naught if you don't have any funding, and operational continuity funding, as I mentioned earlier, is absolutely critical as well. We tried vainly to argue with the PRA that through normal operations we would have enough funding to be able to carry on, to avoid the need for a separate pot of money for this. I say vainly because we were quite firmly told that that was not acceptable. So we now have accepted the fact that we're going to have to find, as is in the guidance, 50% of our annual fixed overheads to be able to have a buffer there, essentially, to keep things running in the case of a resolution scenario. There are some challenges as to how you hold that money within the group or outside your group, and that's particularly the case in the UK because of the restrictions around ring fencing, that we can't place that money on deposit with a non-ring fence bank, and frankly the ring fence banks are unlikely to be really needing cash because they're going to be awash with deposits and so forth in the UK as well. So there are some real practical challenges around how you hold that money and have it separately identified such that it will satisfy your regulators. On to key workers, and as I said earlier, there's really not been a lot of guidance on this in the UK or EU as far as I can see. However, it has been a requirement in the US to list your key workers as part of the resolution planning process now for about 3 years. So if you're looking for any guidance on this, I would suggest perhaps you look there. But there are 3 essential steps. Firstly, identify the key people and roles. So it probably should say that on the slide, not just key people. Consider retention strategies for these folks that you'll need potentially. And then obviously prepare your contingency plans based on that. But an important thing around this is that these people are not all the same people for each stage of the resolution process. So you're going to need, over the fabled, I call it stabilisation weekend, because I fine anyone in my team who talks about a resolution weekend, because it is really a fallacy. And I heard similar words, I think, this morning on that topic. So really, the weekend is all about stabilisation of the organisation and being able to give market confidence that the bank can open up on the Monday morning or Tuesday or whatever, but certainly in short order. That's likely to be a relatively small set of SMEs, excuse me, in key functions like finance and treasury, strategy, and so forth, your legal people. It won't be one person. That slide's not supposed to suggest that it will be one individual, but perhaps a relatively small percentage. The next set of people to highlight are the people you're going to need for restructuring. And I've deliberately pulled this slide in front of the next one, which talks about critical economic functions, because actually, if you don't act very promptly around these people, they will disappear because they have transferable skills, and you would risk losing key people. But it would probably surprise you how quickly you will need them actually within a resolution scenario. And I can speak on that because we have been effectively going through a number of resolution steps within RBS over the past 8 years as we've responded to demands to either restructure things, downsize things, or dispose of them as part of the rescue package that we received. So, you need to be able to revisit your unused recovery options at this stage and check viability and check whether the circumstances have changed. You need to be able to validate all your previous resolution assumptions, and that will take resource to do that. And then you're going to have to, under the guidance of the regulator, develop a strategy as to how you're going to reshape the organisation, how you're going to size and scope that change and prioritise it as well. So these people are very important from day one and shouldn't be ignored. As I mentioned, the other major set will be around maintaining your critical functions and making sure that you discharge the firm's obligations around that. And that won't just be the people who are doing the processing of payments or dealing with particular functions in the front line. You need to consider everything sort of front to back and all the supporting capabilities you will require there in technology and legal, finance and so forth as well. A lot on this will also depend on whether you're facing a systemic resolution situation or an idiosyncratic one as well. And in a systemic situation, I would suggest that these people are even more critical to make sure that things are battened down in that scenario. So in summary, around key workers, not everyone will be retained in the organisation, that's for sure. In RBS, I think we're down from 140,000 to 90,000 at the moment, and it's still falling. So it will be a significant restructuring of your organisation. And the end state really will depend very much on the cause of the problem and also the strategy that's pursued by the regulators in terms of what the end state they see for the firm. So in terms of outcomes, if all of this preparation is done, then there should be a relatively smooth transition, and continuity of operations should be maintained. I think there's a temptation sometimes to view RRP as a really negative thing. It's one of those things that you just have to do and there are no benefits to it whatsoever. And I probably was guilty personally of that kind of thinking at times as well. But the more time you spend on the topic, the more you realise actually if we do RRP properly, then we will create benefit for our individual firms. Because one of the key things that doing RRP properly produces is real protection for our customers and the real economy as well. That's really important, and certainly the journey we've been on within RBS, I think we have very much realised that and see what our key responsibilities around this as banks and bankers. Second thing I would highlight is that, I've got behind myself, sorry. Second thing I would highlight is that it's not all new spend. It's not all going to be money in addition to what you're investing in. You can leverage existing systems. We have leveraged a lot from our business continuity arena. We are also harnessing other work that we're having to do around balance sheet capability as well in terms of valuation. So there are ways of doing things which means that you're not creating a brand new set of requirements that displace other investments within the organisation. And then finally, I think you can really consider that you will be building long-term value for your organisation, for both your stakeholders and for the business itself, by creating real stability within the bank, and laying that down for the future. I joined RBS in 1978, and it was a very boring bank that I joined at that time. I don't mind saying that. And certainly the final thing I'll say before I take any questions is I fully intend to leave a very boring bank when I leave in 2018 or 19, once we're completing the resolution and ring fencing work. And with that, I just thank you for listening.